That can be painful, can be a little bit gut-wrenching, but it's part of the process. You've got to identify those things. And frankly, you probably know it to be true, and then you can get clarity on which things customers are noticing, which things they're not, which things they value and which things they don't.
I share that to say, I think there's a big draw right now towards tradition and nostalgia and heritage.
Google had one that was like, do no evil. What's evil? Because there's a lot of things that Google does, especially with data collection and stuff, that people are like, this is pretty evil. Welcome to the Brand Nerd Podcast. I'm Mitch Metter. Join me as we nerd out over great brands, study the latest business tech, and learn proven strategies from experts and entrepreneurs. Let's get started. What up, nerds? We're back at it. This is season 0 of the Brand Nerd Podcast. Today's episode is all about balancing tradition and innovation for local brands. And an alternative title for this episode, Pete, could be New School Branding for Old School Businesses.
Love it. Also, I just realized you said that and I was like, and there's always that guy on the podcast that just sits in the background and just goes, so good, so good.
Yeah. It's like
That's me.
It's like on like the rap group, there's the guy that's just like, what?
Yo. Yeah. I wish I could have got paid to do stuff like that. Oh, man.
But anyways, today we're going to talk about just like, there's a lot of companies that have been around for a while, and it's hard to know how to balance like your tradition. We've been in business 50 years, or even if it's been 10 years, you've got this tradition established, but when do you innovate? How do you innovate? How do you stay fresh, stay on people's minds, get new customers, not just rely on like your older key customers, that kind of thing. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into, the importance of traditions, but also the importance of innovation. And then we're going to run through some examples and then talk about a couple like practical strategies for how you think about balancing tradition and innovation. So
I love
that's today.
Love it. What made you land on the topic overall? Like, I know we're going to jump in quick, but just a quick overview, tradition versus innovation, like kind of what brought that to your mind initially?
Well, I've worked for mostly companies who have been like 50 years old. When I'm talking about like been employed, W-2 employee of companies that were at least 50 years old. The main 3 companies I worked with before starting Brand Nerd, one was a motorcycle company, Harley Davidson. One was a live audio company. I was a musician, and then out of college started working for this audio company that does like live sound, and they're the biggest in the like the touring industry. And I also worked for a local cabinet maker, but they were distributed nationally. They had like 80 dealers across the country. So, but they had been in business like 50 years. All of them, Harley's been around a long time. I'm actually not sure how long they've been around. I think when I worked there, it was 85 years, but it's been longer now. So
that's interesting that your whole career you worked for companies that likely would have ideally what you would think of like great traditions and different things. But
my best clients, the clients that I've like kept over the years, like that we've really clicked, have been in that same camp where they've been around. Most of them are either companies that the founders are still there, but they're kind of like now their kids are working in the company and like they're in that process, or some of them are actually have been around long enough that the founders have already stepped aside and I'm working with the kids or sometimes even the third generation of those companies. So those are the companies that I actually work really well with. One, because I speak their language. Like I understand the pain that comes from change. And one of the things we talk about is this idea of the way we've always done things. And I've identified that as one of the toughest mentalities to change in a company. And I don't think anybody would argue with that. Like once you're set in your ways, getting everybody in your company to try something new is incredibly difficult. And when I was doing it from within companies, I pretty much thought it was impossible. Like I just like, this isn't going to change. When you're the marketing director for a company that's been around 50 years and you're the youngest person in the in like the office part of the business, and frankly, I actually wasn't the youngest person, but everybody that was younger than me was directly related to the ownership.
Okay.
So it was one of those things where like you just get convinced that change is not going to happen. And even when you make impact in a new direction, it's just very difficult for them to look at you as an expert in your field, versus being an outside consultant, being somebody who's coming in who has, you know, framework for them to follow. All of a sudden, that's a whole new lens, a whole new angle, and all of a sudden you're the expert in the room. And we've seen some amazing things happen for these, you know, old school businesses taking on new school marketing, new school branding. So
yeah.
I mean, the cool thing about traditions is that you have a lot of things built in. There's values that are established. You have customers that have been around a long time. They're loyal. They tell other people about your business. You know, you have an established identity. But some of the things that are a struggle is, like, for example, if you've grown your business off of print advertising, it's really hard to make the case for a newer form of media. You know, how do you switch to something that's like more social media driven? How do you switch to something that's more web based? How do you, if you've got a sales team that's used to, you know, keeping track of all their own customers and all their own potential leads and all of this thing, how do you then get them all into one like CRM that they've got data and they've got automation and all these things helping them do their job better?
Right. It's interesting because we actually live, you know, obviously we live in the digital age, but we live in a time where people are more transient and more less likely to grow roots in places than ever before in history, right? So even millennials, for example, which I am, switch jobs 2 to 3 years tops, right? Like it's rare that you even find people that work for a place for like 10 years, right? Like back in the day, that was normal. Like, oh, we're working here for 15 years. And now that's just not the case because we have so much abundance and opportunity that people can move around. It's just they could, right? And I think I share that to say I think there's a big draw right now for people to just they're drawn towards tradition and nostalgia and heritage because there's not a lot of it. It seems like there's not a lot of it in companies, you know? And it's just something worthy of noting is that, like, I think Generation Z, even millennials, Gen Z, and I'm not sure what the generation is after Gen Z, because even there's some Gen Z kids having kids. So, you know, there's a push now towards more heritage and just looking for companies that stand for different things. So I want to talk about that a little bit too, of just how do you, because there's everyone on the spectrum from businesses that have been around for 50 years, 100 years, and businesses that have just started. And so what does it look like then for those companies to, even someone who just started, to build tradition, you know? And so we'll talk about that more in a little bit, maybe.
Well, I think
worthy of noting from generational standpoint, how different each generation is.
Right. And there comes a point in a company where you realize that the market has changed, or that your customer base is aging out perhaps, or that you're like, you just desire to grow or scale, and you realize that it's going to take what has got you to where you're at now is not going to be the same thing that gets you to that next level. And so how do you balance tradition and innovation? How do you balance old school and new school in a way that is super powerful? Because when you can do that, when you can harness both of those things, like that heritage, that authenticity, and then also harness that like fresh, like know what you're doing, look and feel. That's super powerful.
Yeah, it's fascinating because so heritage really just is like a nice word for like history. And are you familiar with Ben Rector as an artist? Like his singer-songwriter guy? Yeah.
I know a couple
you've heard of him.
Like big hits. I don't know the whole thing.
He has a song called Old Friends, and the idea is he sings like you can grow up, make new ones, but there's nothing like old friends, right? And you can't make an old friend. And so I make the comparison between that idea and you can't make a tradition. in the sense that like you can't make a heritage tradition
Mm-hmm.
unless you start today.
Yeah.
Right. So specifically speaking to a more modern company, which you figured the companies that are 50 to 100 years old are commodities today because there's so much more modern businesses that are being, right? Like there's businesses popping up and brands popping up every single day. And so the businesses that have been around become less and less and less, right? Like with the longer that they've been around. So the only way to really start a tradition is to start today and then continue that, right? And like and build upon that. Yeah. Which is kind of a fascinating thought because in the same way, you can't make an old friend. You either have old friends or you start today and make a friend and they become an old friend.
Sure.
And so I just think that's a fascinating thought to think like, man, and sometimes tradition and stuff happens on accident. It's like, it's not always you kind of stumble upon traditions and you realize this is actually part of our culture. This is part of our DNA. And then you cling to it and it becomes tradition.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very true. So you don't want to be afraid of like taking that step into, I want to create a tradition or I want to.
Correct.
Yeah.
'Cause I think there's something about tradition that it implies like it had to have existed already.
Right.
Right. But a tradition started at some point.
Yeah.
That's what made it a tradition.
Yeah.
And so even smaller like companies, if you're like, man, if you can't think of right now, as we're talking about business traditions, if you can't think of anything, perhaps there are some that are there that you just can't identify, but perhaps you just need to start making traditions and allow those traditions to become traditional.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So me and my wife actually like argue about this all the time. She tries to start traditions. She'll go like, let's have,
I guess the language is weird. You can't start a tradition.
Well, but you
start something that becomes a tradition.
And we argue about this. Like her position is that you can decide something's a tradition. Like, like Christmas, she'll be like, I want to start a tradition with our kids this year. And we're going to do this every year. Whereas my approach is like, let's do it this year. Yeah. And if we like it, do it next year. And then it becomes a tradition.
It becomes a tradition.
Right. Versus this idea of like
semantics. You guys are saying the same thing, but just like slightly different angles. Right. Yeah.
Well, it's the same. Like, she goes, when we were dating, so how many kids do you want? I'm like, well, I want one. Yeah. And then we'll figure out if we can do two. Yeah. And then I want, and it's like when you have one kid, then you go, well, can we handle a second one? Do we want a second one? Like what? And then you have two. And then, we stopped at 3 because that was like, we're like, this is our sweet spot, or we don't want the chaos of a fourth, or, we're at that stage in life where like my thinking was more along the lines of like, when are they going to graduate high school? And do I still have like, am I still going to be at an age where like life is going to be fun? Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that's a selfish way to look at it, but that was
right.
my thinking.
Right. No, it totally makes sense. So balancing tradition and innovation, companies that are perhaps older have the benefit of having, likely, I'm speaking generally, have the benefit of having traditions established, and newer companies are at the disadvantage from a traditional standpoint because they theoretically wouldn't have as much tradition. Yeah. Now, older companies though are oftentimes will struggle to innovate. Right. So they hold true to their traditions. Not always. I'm just speaking 30,000 foot view, and so
they're stuck in their ways.
Whereas a new company could be very innovative but they're not sure how to identify traditions that they're doing. So like talk about that a little bit, just in a nutshell.
Well, I mean, so when a company that's been around a while starts to innovate, there's a big risk of potentially losing customers that you've had for a long time. If your innovation goes too far, or, if your innovation goes against your core values or the brand identity that you've established to that point. Right. And so I think that's important to take into consideration and to know up front, hey, we might lose some people on this and we're willing to die on this hill because we think this is what's best on the company in the long haul. Is like, we're going to have to say no to some people. They're going to say, I don't like this. And you're going to say, well, this is what we're doing. Right. And that's a real threat, and you need to be aware of that going into it. Yeah. So yeah, I think uh, when it's time to innovate, it's often, by the time it becomes clear that you need to innovate, sometimes it's actually
Too late.
or like it feels too late.
That's good.
But markets change. An example I like to use is like, if you look at 25 years ago, the top companies in the world, you would have seen like General Electric, you would have seen Exxon Mobil, you would have seen, these big powerhouse industry type companies from yesteryear. Now, when you look at the top companies in the world, you see Apple,
Tesla,
Google, Tesla in value for sure.
Yeah. Amazon.
Yeah. I mean, Tesla's a great example in the automotive industry. They're worth, I think, like multiple times what Ford and GM are worth.
Yeah.
Because of the innovation that they have there.
Right.
And, like, I think I'm not a stock guy or like a market trend guy, but I know there was a lot of people who were super bearish on Tesla, saying like essentially they were overpriced. Like, we need to, they're eventually the numbers are going to catch up to the stock price. But when you see stuff like in the news recently with Tesla, Ford, GM, Rivian, and I think even more companies have all decided they're going to start manufacturing their cars with the Tesla plug, and Tesla's going to allow them on their charger network because theirs is far and away the best charger network in the country. Then, okay, now all of a sudden they're not just an automaker anymore. Yep. Now they're Shell.
Yeah.
Or now they're
they're the producer of they're the distributor of the electricity.
Yeah. So that's a great example of innovation. I even like, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole on Tesla, but like the way they launched their company was essentially, we're going to make a really super premium car. They made the Tesla Roadster, and it was built on a Lotus shell. And they, we're going to sell these, $100,000 plus cars. Yep. And then we're going to roll out the Model S, which is also 100,000 model. So we're going luxury. And then only once they'd established, hey, we've got this super car, now we've got this luxury electric car. Then they rolled out the Model 3, which was the affordable for everybody car. So they essentially bankrolled themselves by establishing what I think a lot of companies kind of go the opposite. And I'm not suggesting their way is the best way.
Yeah.
VC funded, we've talked about this before. VC funded is a whole different ball game than, or even publicly traded is a whole different ball game than local cash flow.
Right.
Yeah,
but it is true that people typically start with if they're thinking through packages or whatever, it's like, we'll start with what's the most affordable one, then they build up from that. It's like they did the opposite.
If you work for a plumber and then you decide to go out on your own, the first thing you do is you look at the other plumbers' prices, and you because your operating costs are less, you can charge less.
Right.
And that's how you build your company. You start low and then you build a company over time to something that is, more of a company versus a freelancer.
Yeah, we might have to do in the future a series of podcast episodes where we do deep dives on different companies. And just like literally the whole podcast is us analyzing their company, and that would probably be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Just breaking down.
We're going to get into some examples of traditional companies that have innovated, some better than others.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be really interesting.
Yeah. How do you identify like just some of for the people that are like even tradition, right? Like, how can someone identify tradition or a key tradition or a key value that they have? I remember being at a small vehicle wrap company. I've shared this before, but like, I remember when I was there during my time there, they were doing a lot of work, internal work on creating their core values, creating and it was stuff that they lived out, but it was like, how do you get those things then on paper? And so we can actually start to use that language and those sort of things. So, it doesn't have to be just values, but how can someone identify within their business, regardless of the size, some values and traditions that they take part in?
So there's kind of three things and this is kind of like, business school 101. But I think the way I look at it has kind of its own twist, and it's been from my own reading and learning over time. And I don't claim to be the expert on this level of business operations and branding. Like, I'm definitely more of like, after you have your core values
Come to
established. Well, we'll help you clarify them perhaps, but like, we'll help you identify the identity that's already there, but you have to do some internal work to really get these things. So the three things are your vision, and vision is very broad. A lot of companies have a vision statement, a mission statement, and core values. And I think those things are important, but I have kind of a take on each of those. So your vision should fit on one page.
Yeah.
And I think there's actually a book that I think is called One Page Vision or something like that. I can look it up and we'll throw up an image of it because I have it on audiobook. I don't have it a physical hard copy. But I really like that book. I listened to the whole thing because essentially what it is as a business owner or an operator, you sit down and you just write what you want the business to look like in 5 years.
Right.
And you just on one page.
Yeah.
And that's something that everybody can look at, and then that, get it framed or whatever. And it's got that vision. A mission is different. A mission is typically like 1 to 3 sentences, and it's talking specifically about like, and there needs to be something measurable about it, because it's a mission. Like if you're in a military and you have a mission, you have an objective,
right?
So your mission statement, and Storybrand does a great job of this. Donald Miller does a great job of this.
I went through his Business Made Simple, and it was sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. No, it was just, I think the breakdown was blank. We will do blank by blank because blank.
Exactly.
And it was we will help 10,000 homes fix their toilets or plumbing because everybody deserves to live in a home with safe water and X, Y, and Z.
Exactly.
So
yeah, that's exactly what, and that's different than a lot of companies' mission statements. A lot of like the mission and vision statement thing gets really blurry.
It does. There's a lot of translations out there. Yeah.
And I think core values. So core values is the third thing, and I think core values is something that a lot of people get. They do two things wrong. One, they get really aspirational about it. They don't identify what actually are their core values.
It's like what they want their values to be versus like who they actually are.
And the other thing is they get way too vague. So like a lot of companies, one of their core values will be something like excellence. Well, excellence, or like excellence in all things or something. Well, that's a huge statement because the company up the road actually does higher end work than you do. They do more excellent work. And you've made a strategic decision to not do that high end work.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So if your core value is excellence, then what does that mean? So you need to be more specific about your core values.
Yeah.
And so, excellence at all costs or at all doesn't really make sense. Integrity can be the same thing. What does integrity mean? Integrity can be structural integrity. It can be, so
lying or not lying.
Right.
Yeah. Being honest.
Right. And, so those are core values that I kind of push back on and go, how can we make this, more realistic? Like one of the core values of Brand Nerd is marketing that makes the world a better place. And by that, we mean, we don't want to engage in really like, some of the like scammy tactics that a lot of marketers take place in. We don't want to buy email lists and clean them up and, essentially do like a almost phishing type scam to try to get people in. And that's a hill that we're willing to die on. If a client asks us to do that, we're like, we don't feel like this makes the world a better place.
Right.
And so that's tough. And it also, when we say marketing that makes the world a better place, that helps us choose customers that we feel like have high values and are trying to offer a service to the world that's going to help people versus like, a cash grab type business or like, hey, I'm a life coach. I'm 22 years old. I'm a life coach. I'm like, you haven't lived life yet.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a pre-life coach.
Yeah. What do you, So, that's a core value that I feel like has a little bit more specificity to it. And in the same vein, like Google had one that was like, do no evil, which I felt like well, what's evil?
Right.
You know, because I
Right.
it's kind of become a laughing stock at this point, because there's a lot of things that Google does, especially with like data collection and stuff, that people are like, this feels pretty evil.
Yeah.
So anyways, I think we've talked enough about kind of the values, but when you are innovating on tradition, it's important to have an established value set, and understanding that you can change your values, you can innovate and change your values. And I think I should back up just 1 second, because I said core values, some people lean too far into aspirational values. I don't think it's bad to have, if you have 5 core values, I don't think it's a bad thing to have 2 of them be more aspirational. I think, you know, that's kind of where the innovation, like, you want to be moving towards something.
Right.
But I think you should have some that are kind of like pillars, like, this is what we already do.
Yep.
Even if you're like, we do it 80% of the time, like, and we want to get to 100%, but like, this is a pillar that we've established, you know, and they don't have to be as complicated as you might think, but it helps employees and it helps customers like have a lens to look through, if they even know about it. Employees should, but customers maybe not so much.
Do you think that a customer should be able to, like, is there any benefit of a customer knowing your values, or like, or how can someone articulate those things to a customer in a way that's not cringy, as the kids say, or like,
I don't think it's like a message that you lead with necessarily. Unless it happens to be directly related to like a philosophical statement that you make. I'm a big fan of philosophical statements. Like, for example, we worked with a company that was like, their tagline or motto was like, we're the landscaping company that actually calls you back. And it was like it was maybe not like powerful. If you'd never worked with a landscaping company before, maybe it's not that powerful. But anybody, you know, they're like, in our marketplace, anybody who's worked with a landscaping company, they're like, this, like, we've had a lot of people reach out, because they're like, I called 3 people and none of them called me back. Then I saw you and I was like, all right, let's see if they hold true. And, you know, they've made that's one of their core values, is essentially like, they've got a timer on when a call is placed, when a voicemail is left or anything like that. They have automation set up to make sure that they're calling these people back.
I love that.
And I can't remember what their time frame is, but I think it's like, you know, 12 hours or something like that. Like, it's a very tight.
It needs to happen within that. I love that so much. I love that. I wonder specifically, like, how companies, you know, I think it was good for you to clarify that you don't necessarily need to lead with values, because I think companies do get caught up in that. But you know, going back to traditions though, what are some things then that, like, I'm trying to think of the right way to say it. So specifically a company, I'm trying to think of like the small, medium-sized businesses, when they're building traditions, how can they start to build a tradition? Like, that would be kind of mind-boggling to me. Like, all right, does it have to be like that we start something, or do you have to look at things that you're already doing? Because you're right, to your wife and your argument that you were talking about, starting a new tradition versus just trying something and seeing if it sticks. Is that would you just say that, to keep it simple? Like, you either try something and see if it sticks, or you say, this is what we're doing?
I think
what's better?
I think business is a little bit different than
you and your wife deciding what you want to do for Christmas.
If you're a local business, like you are not you're probably not trying to reinvent the wheel, or you're rarely trying to reinvent the wheel. You know what I mean? There's probably an example out there of somebody who's doing something similar, but maybe it's just in a different zip code, a different state, or, you know, region. And so you have, you know, or even different industry, and you can like bring things in that have some like proven examples to follow when it comes to like traditions. But, you know, when I think I don't want to get too caught on traditions, and because that's a little different than tradition. You know what I mean? Like, a tradition, having a company that's traditional, to me, is more just about that authenticity. It's been around a while. Like, they've got a built-in process. They've got a level of quality that they're capable of hitting on a regular basis, versus like traditions, which are, you know, maybe like I don't know, like, save 15% on your car insurance or whatever, like their tradition,
Right.
is to kind of live in that space. So kind of a practical strategy for understanding where you stand is, it's super simple, but not enough companies do it. It's just to survey your customers. Whether you want to take your top customers, or you want to take a more broader approach and kind of maybe weigh your top customers, I should say, when I say top customers, I mean like your right fit customers, the one that you're like, man, I wish we had 10 more of these, 100 more of these, and figure out what it is that specifically is clicking for them, and give them a way to do that via a survey or something like that. And it does two things. One, it'll bring to your attention things said in your customer's own words as to what they think, what value you have provided them. And then on the other side of that, if there are things that are needed to be improved about your services, that brings that to your attention too. And that can be painful, obviously. It can be a little bit gut wrenching, but it's part of the process. Like you've got to identify those things. And frankly, you probably know it to be true, but sometimes you're not sure if the customer notices it or not. And then you can kind of get clarity on which things customers are noticing, which things they're not, which things they value and which things they don't. Because sometimes the things that we think are like deal breakers end up being not that big a deal for customers.
If you're going to do a survey, offer an incentive, please. like I get emails to do surveys and stuff, and if there's not an incentive, I almost never do it. So even if it's just like, hey, you doing this 5-minute survey signs you up to win a $50 gift card.
That's one way to do it. Yeah.
Like, there's a million ways.
It depends what it is. Make it really personal. Like there's a different,
quick, personal.
So there's this like, it's a big thing in business now, is like the benchmarking, the constant measuring of data. Like we were just recently traveling in one of the airports. As you're walking out, I first saw it in Europe, and now it's in the States too. The bathroom had a 5-star review system. It wasn't stars, it was faces, from like a red frowny face up to a green smiley face with like different shades in between.
Yeah, that's cool.
And as you're walking out, you just touch the bathroom condition, or your experience in the bathroom.
Yeah.
But it gives them some real-time feedback of like, hey, I walked into a stall and saw something that I'll never forget. You hit that red face, and then somebody will be over to attend to it.
Right.
And I think that's a good example of that, like of a positive, making marketing that makes the world a better place. Right. The other side of it is like the constant emails and text messages you get when you interact with a company, especially a big company. And that can be really overwhelming. Like, how was your experience with your 5-minute phone call with customer service? Like, you really want to know? Because I'll tell you.
Yeah. But there's such a stark difference between something that you can just do really quickly in real time, press a smiley face or something in between.
And I think those level surveys would be good for local businesses.
That just feels so accessible.
Level. Right. But what I'm talking about is more of like we've identified a personal email that says, hey, we've identified you as a key customer, and we want to know a few things about you. We've created this survey. It's super quick. It'll take you 5 minutes, but your thoughtful answers would really help our business. And you could definitely do some sort of exchange, but we're talking to customers that probably want to help you because they're already probably repeat. They're the type of customers that you want to have. So, and they want to see you be successful too. So that's why that, if you make it more personal, it'll happen. And we've done that for numerous companies. It's actually one of the add-ons that we offer when we do a messaging session is to actually help them create a survey and help them send it out. And we'll often do it from we'll send it from our email because that adds another layer too of like, hey, you were actually identified by them as a key customer and we're working with them. Takes the burden off of them, so.
All right. I love that. Surveying your customers. Yeah. I wouldn't have thought, I obviously it's something that's like important, but like, it's not where your mind goes right away. Yeah. To just get analytics, but I'm not as analytical as a person either. So
Sure.
like the value of having other people in your team that are different from you and don't think like you.
Yeah. So, I mean, as long as we're talking about practical strategies, I mean, I think it's really important to talk about or to look at market trends too, not only in your industry, but in parallel industries. Keep up to date with what your competitors are doing.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know exactly if what they're doing is being successful or not. But if you identify something that you feel like is something you can and should do, then that can be worth, you know, a huge percentage of profit or business growth, either in not losing market share to them,
Yeah.
or in, you know, serving your customers that much better. Involving your team is a big part of it.
I would think
too.
that's massive. I would think that's massive because you need buy-in.
Yeah, you got to involve your team, and I think one of the things that I've seen be a real mistake when people involve their team is just asking open-ended questions and like just letting them kind of like free respond,
Yeah.
you know, and like go off of their gut.
Yeah.
There's room, there's a space for that, but having like, hey, these are the 5 things we're trying to measure about, you know, like customers, you know, timeliness of their, you know, responses, things like how easy it was to do business, or how, you know, how, and then like, for example, if you're talking about like maybe a salesperson or something like that, you know, the people or account manager, people who are interacting, or even a service tech, having some questions along the lines of, okay, so did the customer, you know, this is what the customer said they wanted to do. Now, where did this actually go?
Yeah.
You know, and being able to measure so that you have that information about like, okay, so some people come in and, you know, they say they want the works package, but then at the end of the day, we ended up giving them something smaller. And then some of it's reversed too. And just being able to understand what the customer journey is like.
Yeah.
And then you don't get so hot and cold. Hey, we've got this customer on the line. They say they want all the new stuff, you know, they want the top technology, they want the best. And you're not like, you know, already starting to buy new equipment and everything else because you realize that, hey, sometimes these don't lead out, or only 25% of the time do they actually follow through. Yeah. That kind of thing. You start to have that, analytics there, but that's involving your team, and then also involving them in a way that's strategic and not just kind of this generic feedback time of like, I think they're going to close.
Right.
You know, well, it's like, we know your close rate is 38%. And, you know, so let's not live in the world of, I think, like, if I had to put a number on it, it was XYZ. Right. There's room for that, but it's just recognize what it is.
Yeah.
That it's,
yeah, I love the idea of bringing, as a leader, business leader specifically, making sure you're giving your team really clear instruction, because that conversation can go a million different ways. If you leave it open-ended, regardless of what you're asking them, really, but specifically if anything to do with tradition or values or anything of that sort, like giving them guide rails, because you can end up where like one person says something and then it's just like, before you know it, you're just completely off track because they had no direction to begin with. So you said like giving them 5 things.
I've been in those meetings.
Yeah.
Like, they just roundtable meetings where it's just everybody has a chance to share. And I mean, I don't feel like I'm the most qualified to talk on leading the best meetings ever. But you know, there are some things I picked up, and that's one that for sure is talking about things in real numbers and not just open speculation. That's definitely an important thing. And honestly, it can just be a waste of everybody's time. That's what it comes down to. All right. So we've talked about the importance of balancing tradition and innovation. We've talked a little bit about, you know, recognizing when to innovate, and even some practical strategies. I want to get into some examples. I think this is cool. I came up with a couple that honestly just kind of hit me off the top of the head, and actually thought of some more while we were sitting here talking. So let's just go through the list. The first one that I thought of that's really interesting is Lego. And so I grew up playing with Lego, and notice I'm saying Lego and not Legos.
Yeah.
Because I watched the show Lego Masters and have learned from them that it is Lego. It is never plural.
Yeah.
You play with Lego, not Legos.
Yeah, Legos. Yeah.
So it's like, I feel kind of like special that I know that.
No, that's a brand decision though. You know, that could technically be a tradition,
like
but
Scandinavian, you know, the company. So like the word probably means something to
Lego.
them. Yeah, like it probably actually has like a meaning to them. Yeah, perhaps. But anyways, it's playing with Lego, not playing with Legos.
Yeah.
You know, this is not a Lego.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is a Lego, but it's not a
Legos.
Like, when you have two of them, it's not I'm holding Legos.
Yeah, it's I'm holding multiple Lego.
Exactly. Many much Lego. So anyways, the thing I think is cool about Legos, it's been around a long time. Like when I was a kid, my uncle had a big bin of Lego at my grandma's house, you know, that I would play with, and that was probably my first introduction. I remember like if you ever saw the Lego movie, like one of the characters is the Lego spaceman or astronaut. I'm not such a Lego nerd that I know all the like ins and outs of it, but he's one of the characters, and I remember he had that Lego figurine, and so you know, that was kind of the starting point. Is they had a lot of their own IP, and it became, you know, it was just kind of this generic stuff: space, jungle,
And what's IP?
intellectual property. Thank you. You know, things that sorry, I got a little jargony on you there.
No, I
intellectual property, so ideas that you own.
Yeah.
And that's become a big thing now with like licensing, and IP licensing is a huge thing. If you ever watch Shark Tank, you know, they're constantly talking about licensing and IP, and you know, that's an interesting like play nowadays. But Lego took that on and you know, started licensing. When I was a kid, they still had some of their own IP, and they like kind of got into like some of the more engineering stuff with like Lego Technics. They had, you know, like dinosaurs and robots and all these like IP stuff. But nowadays Lego is very much, and it started when I was a kid, but it's only
now it's only feels almost like they exclusively that's what they do.
Now it's almost all this giant licensing play,
right?
You know, to the point where like, you know, I've spent I spent some time looking at like the Rivendell Lego set on like YouTube and stuff, and I'm like, oh man, do I as an adult need to invest?
And that's all licensing
Lord of the Rings
is, by the way, y'all. It's just like getting licenses to films, video games, all that kind of stuff, and then they create Lego sets around that, so versus just random robots and aliens. And
so like, if you ever wonder why, like, you know, every time you watch a Star Wars movie, they're introducing new characters and new spaceships and you're like, why can't this just be like the old Star Wars? Which I feel every time I watch it, I'm like, I just want to see the Millennium Falcon, not, you know, and they do, you know, the first movie, they featured the Millennium Falcon quite a bit, but they're always introduced, you know, it's not, they don't just bring, they don't just use the same ships in every movie. They're constantly like bringing out a new ship, because the reason is they can then turn that into a toy and sell it. And there's collectors that want to own everything. And then there's also like kids watch the movie and they want to go buy it, you know, and I'm sure Disney, who bought the Star Wars franchise from Lucasfilm, from George Lucas, I'm sure there's a monetary incentive to them pushing their created IP versus the old school stuff. I'm guessing. So anyways, that's kind of an overview of licensing. But Lego has gone into movies. Obviously, you see like the Lego movies. They got TV shows. They've got IP TV shows. Like they've got license, like there's Lego Star Wars TV shows and things like that.
Well, Lego Masters, isn't that just where they just have to build, it's like challenges?
Yeah, but even some of those shows are IP related, interestingly enough. But yeah, no, there's challenges. I mean, there was one that was all about like Marvel. They had to like recreate scenes from Marvel movies and stuff. I watched the show because I'm a huge Will Arnett fan. Ever since Arrested Development, like
it's a great show.
Oh, so good. But yeah, like Will Arnett, I'll pretty much watch anything he's in. And he's not only the host of Lego Master, he's also the host of or he's also Lego Batman.
Right.
And he's got it, not in the Lego movie, he was such a popular character that they spun it off and created a Lego Batman movie. And yeah, he's hilarious. But that Lego's a great example of a company with a long tradition that has innovated over the years, but the soul of Lego is still there.
Yeah.
It's still about kids building, fantastic things. And I was the type of Lego user as a kid that, like, I got the kit, I put it together, it stayed together as long as it could. I had 3 little brothers, but eventually that thing fell apart and it just got thrown in the giant Lego bin. And we created whole worlds in our playroom, of Lego. And we had like our own currency, like you would exchange gold coins for swords, and
now it's all Minecraft.
Yeah. But it was similar
Digital
in
Lego.
that, like, every now and then we'd do a reset where everything went back in the bin, and then the way that you built up influence in our little world was you had to dig through the bin, and if you found the gold coin, it was yours. If you found the gun, it was yours. If you found the and then it would become this whole, like, race. I was the oldest, so I usually did pretty well. But yeah, I mean, it was a fun time. And my youngest brothers still complain, occasionally about, like, some of the raw deals that they got playing Lego. Another great example, I don't want to spend the whole episode on Lego, is Harley Davidson.
Yeah, Harley's a good one.
Yeah, so Harley, I've got some insider knowledge, having worked there. But this is a company that's been around a long time. They've established a reputation as being the, like, motorcycle company, to the point where, like, Honda, Yamaha, all these other companies, Polaris, and have come out with motorcycles, and they, frankly, are better in many ways, like in terms of reliability, in terms of buying new parts and all these things. But Harley's still king because it's Harley. They've got a brand, they've got the tradition. It says something when you're on a Harley. It says something about you. You have an identity there. I'm not sure, they've innovated here recently, and I'm not sure that it's all been good, to be honest. As far as a brand, and to the point where they've actually spun off a lot of their innovations. So the first one that I can think of is Livewire. They came out with the Harley Davidson Livewire, which is their electric motorcycle. One, it wasn't a Harley style motorcycle. It was kind of more of a like a forward leaning motorcycle, not full on like crotch rocket. I'm not sure if that's the term I call them. The faster motorcycle. But they actually spun that off, and now it's its own company, its own. I mean, I'm sure Harley still owns a piece, but now it's its own publicly traded company called Livewire. Another one that they started like regular e-bikes.
Yeah, I was gonna
like
say
street bikes.
Yeah, I remember looking them up, and
Commuter bike?
the designs were awesome. Like, they looked amazing.
Super expensive compared to, like, what a lot of e-bikes are coming out of China and everything. But that's called Serial One. They've also spun that off. I don't know if it's publicly traded or not. I didn't do a super ton of research, but I did notice that they spun that off. And then they have balance bikes too, which is interesting. It's kid bikes, but they've got, like, the battery looks kind of like a battery that you'd put on your power drill or something. It's like a battery pack that snaps in. And it's like a balance bike. It's like if you've seen the balance bikes, like bike without pedals that kids learn to balance on. But they almost look like, some of them look like almost like BMX bikes, like they're low profile, and then they've got the battery. So I guess, in the images, they're at, like, the skate park or whatever. So,
I don't know if I would trust my toddler on a Harley Davidson electric balance bike.
I don't know what the age range is. I know they go up to 20-inch, which would be like a middle school age child. But anyways, it's an interesting innovation. Don't honestly know if that's going to work out for them or not.
How effective it is, right? Because when you think of Harley, you think of, like, the guy wearing, like, a bandana, and he's like, it's
straight pipes,
gas guzzling, like, it's that vibe. And so I understand the tension of wanting to innovate to attract a different audience, because those people will eventually slowly, like, I guess, get older and maybe buy less bikes.
The thought process,
but you also have to be very careful, right? Because we're seeing brands even now that are making decisions that are affecting their base, and so understanding who your base is what traditions you have offered that base of people, and making sure that they don't feel robbed of anything too quickly.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't innovate. It just means you have to do it more thoughtfully.
Yeah.
And I think the older you are as a company, the more thoughtful you have to be. It's not like, hey, let's just try something, right? A small business can say, let's try something and see if it sticks. If it sticks, it could be a tradition.
Yeah.
I think a 50, 100-year-old company or something, they have to be very intentional and say like, all right, if we're going to try something new, we really got to stand by it.
Yeah. And I think Harley is an example of a company that has survived for a long time based on its traditions.
Right.
And they're by sticking to who they are, and that hasn't needed to change a whole lot. There have been some ups and downs, on the manufacturing side, where I've saw firsthand. There was a lot of changes. You went from like essentially grease monkeys building these bikes by hand to now it's more like assembly line, like you would see at like a Toyota plant or something. Yeah. Okay. It's very much like the efficiencies there. It's made them much more reliable than they would have been back in the day. Right. But then on the other hand, when they rolled out these e-bikes, there was a big pushback from like, Harley Owners Group, because they're like separate, but it's separate from Harley Davidson, but it's its own entity, Hog. And there's a lot of pushback on the e-bike side of things because it's not the same. Plus, like, one of the things about Harleys is all the accessories and stuff that you can bolt on and make it your own type of thing. And e-bikes don't have that same level of modification. That's Harley in a nutshell. The next one I wanted to talk about is Ford. Ford is a company that obviously, if you go back to Henry Ford, one of the like most quoted business and branding dudes of all time. And so Henry Ford actually brought the assembly line to automotive technology. And, the Model T was the most popular car in America at a time. And actually made cars affordable to like middle America. In a way that they wouldn't have been previously. And then, they've had to iterate a lot over the years, like the Mustang, and a lot of different moments have saved them. But one of the most interesting ones when it comes to branding is in the early 2000s, Ford acquired a bunch of other brands. Obviously, back in the day, there was Ford, Lincoln, and Mercury were the three brands, and they were all built in Ford factories, and but they acquired a bunch of others. And the one that I know, one of them was Land Rover. I know one of them was Jaguar. I'm struggling to think if there was more off the top of my head, but when Alan Mulally came on board at Ford, it was a financially strenuous time. And this book, American Icon, is one of the best, one of my favorite books, because it reads almost like a novel, but it's true.
It's true story.
A lot of it follows Alan Mulally's time at Ford, where he came over from Boeing. He got passed over at Boeing for their CEO job. Ford brought him on as their CEO, and one of the hilarious parts of the book is a reporter asking him at his initial press conference, essentially, hey, cars have a lot of parts and a lot of engineering. Do you think you're capable of, managing a company that has like all of these different moving pieces and things that have to work together? And at the end of the day, it has to be safe for people to drive. And he was like, well, airplanes have like 30 times the amount of parts, and they have to fly. So he was like, yeah, I think I'll be okay. Was essentially like his response.
Crazy.
So he was the head of a division at Boeing, and then he came over there as the CEO. And it's not just a branding play. One of the things he did was, getting to those core values and eliminating a lot of these other brands. And one of the things he noticed when he was driving in to the parking lot the first time is all of the cars that weren't Fords in the parking lot. Like most of them were Jaguars or Land Rover, but there's also Mercedes and, all these cars. And he's like, guys, if we're not making cars that we want to drive, what are we doing?
So good, man.
And so he actually sold off Jaguar, sold off Land Rover, because those brands were actually tanking with Ford, like to this day, you can buy a used Land Rover, and you can like look at like the ones that while Ford was making them, they're a lot more affordable than the ones prior and the ones since. Yeah. So it's Ford wasn't doing a good job with his brand, so he sold them off. Somebody else can do with that. We're going to focus on what we do best, which is Ford, Lincoln, Mercury.
Right.
On top of that, he got them financially right sized and got them in a place, and there's actually a lot of like lending involved. Like they got a big line of credit from some banks, but to the point that when the financial crash happened in 2008, they didn't have to take on any of those bailout dollars that GM and Chrysler did have to take. And that was a big moment for Ford, because they could be the ones that stuck out their chest and said, we didn't take any government money.
Which at the time would have been a very powerful thing to say.
It was huge. Something they've done more recently, Alan's since retired and does the speaking circuit now. But something they did more recently is they've actually stopped making cars except the Mustang. They don't make, the Ford Escape, all those cars. They just decided, we've got the number one selling vehicle in the country in the Ford F-150. But our cars we're not competing with Toyota and Kia and all these other companies. We're just going to focus on what we do best. And they're also investing in electric and all the future technologies. To the point where even when they rolled out the electric Mustang, it's actually an SUV. It's not even a car. Which is, for better or worse,
It's crazy. I didn't know that. I didn't know they were stopping, ceasing to create cars and stuff.
They don't make cars anymore except the Mustang.
Wow. So they just literally just double down. I mean, they have the Raptor, the Ford Raptor.
Yeah, right? But that's a truck.
A truck. Okay.
Yeah. So trucks and SUVs, but no cars except the Mustang.
Yeah. Dang. That's crazy. It makes sense because you don't see it in their branding or marketing or anything. You just see the trucks and that's it.
From a branding, this isn't, I guess this is innovation, but they've essentially turned Mustang into a brand.
Right.
In that it's
sub-brand.
They've got a car and now an SUV that are both Mustang. They've done the same with the Bronco. They brought back the Bronco, turned that into a brand. They've got the Bronco Sport that is an entirely different car than the Bronco or SUV, truck, whatever, utility vehicle. The Bronco Sport it's essentially a daily driver type, whereas the Bronco is a direct competitor with the Jeep Wrangler.
Right.
And it's more like an off-road, and they souped it up to the point where it's a legit competitor with.
It's an interesting philosophy to just create sub brands and pour into those versus creating hey, we're gonna do Ford Taurus and redo that 2024 Ford Taurus, or whatever.
They also got rid of Mercury. Mercury's not around.
Yeah,
it's just Ford and Lincoln.
Fascinating. Okay.
So so
Hershey's.
Hershey's, exactly.
Hershey's.
So a brand that is,
sweet.
Local. Well, I should say dear to our heart because we live 30 minutes from Hershey.
Yeah.
But Hershey is another one that obviously has a long tradition dating back to Milton Hershey. My wife is a Hershey. Milton Hershey famously didn't have any kids, which is why he started Milton Hershey School. He decided to have all the kids.
Right.
It was a boys' school, and initially, now it's everybody. But but he is, I think, he would be the first cousin of her great grandpa. Okay. So it's pretty distant, but
still
they are
pretty cool
from the same Hershey. And he actually is from the area that I grew up in Mount Joy, and desired to build the plant in Mount Joy, but was denied the permits.
Wow.
So, but he also was he started 4 or 5 companies before Hershey's chocolate.
Yeah.
One of them was also a candy company that failed.
That's crazy. It's crazy to me that Mount Joy is literally the Adidas passing up on Jordan.
There you go. I haven't watched that one yet.
Yeah, Adidas passed up on Jordan, so he went to Nike, and Mount Joy passed up on literally Milton Hershey.
Yeah. Well, it would be a totally different town because Hershey then became a company town where essentially, all the houses and everything. Everybody that lived in Hershey
worked there
essentially.
Yeah. And even the Hershey Theater, that was built for it was rec centers and stuff, where kids can come and play, and it's crazy.
And they have a very innovative business model in that, or ownership structure, in that they are publicly traded, but the number one, the majority owner of the company is still to this day Milton Hershey School. So it's kind of a cool idea in that they make decisions in the best interest for their nonprofit school.
Mm-hmm.
That is and they pay for tuitions for kids who need their schooling. A lot of times it's kids who are in traumatic situations and all of this stuff. And, you know, we know people that have been house parents there and stuff and worked with the kids that are going there. And it's an amazing,
beautiful campus. Beautiful campus.
Oh yeah. I mean, like it's
all grades. It's like elementary school through high school.
Yep. So it's a really, really interesting business model, but they've innovated in other ways too. Hershey's owns a bunch of other brands in addition to candy. They've gotten into health foods, and they've gotten into sustainability practices that are leading the industry. So just near to our heart.
Yep.
Sweetest place on earth, right up the road.
So they say.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of Hershey and chocolate would be Apple.
Yeah, well, I had to throw Apple in there. We're both Apple nerds, but like Apple is such a good example of innovation over the years, particularly the past 25. Like if you think about, you know, Apple's big success started, you know, way back when with the Macintosh 2.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, famously, we saw Steve Wozniak speak famously. Apple was the first that had like a color monitor.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it just really got into a lot of homes and was big, but then they didn't follow it up with any like really big hits to the point where eventually Steve Jobs was ousted and, you know, went and started Next Computers and Pixar and all that stuff. But came back in the 90s and rolled out the iMac, which was a game changer, not like game changer in terms of suddenly Apple was the number one computer company in the world like they are now, but it brought them back. It was a profitable product finally. It was super iconic. Like, we need to get one of those for the office. I've been dragging my feet on that. So like I want to have an iMac in here. But then it was really the iPod that really like
shot 'em up.
Totally changed the game. In terms of Apple, and all of a sudden this was when I was in high school. Well, it was actually middle school, but like high school is when, like, you know, I got like an iPod Color.
Okay. Yeah, I remember.
Video Color. You could watch videos on it. It was like a whole thing. It still had the click wheel.
Slightly elongated screen almost.
Yeah.
Or was it the shorter, stubbier one?
No, it was a 4x3, like because that's all there was at that point.
Yeah, the 4x3
there wasn't
one.
widescreen yet. I mean, I assume it was 4x3. I'm sure there's people out there that will gladly correct me. But yeah, I mean, the iPod was revolutionary. I remember taking my dad's iPod to school for a project. Like, I needed it for something, and it was like the second or third gen, and like just being like swarmed by people. Like, what's you got an iPod? You know, like,
that was cool.
The MacBook then came out. The iBook turned into the MacBook when I was like right around the time I graduated. I had the white MacBook. It's still in my house. My kids have destroyed it. It's broke. It doesn't work. I gave it to them just to play with. And they totally destroyed
play with it. They did.
They sure did. It is now, broken, literally
destroyed,
broken in two pieces. But yeah, and then the iPhone, don't need it.
Right.
You know, amazing press conference, amazing.
So memorable.
The iPad, obviously, like, it is like there's so many people that don't even call tablets. They call them iPads. Like, my grandma has like, you know, like some sort of Samsung or something that they bought at the Verizon store. And my grandpa got swindled into buying one. It's her iPad, you know, and Apple Watch, you know, like
Tim Cook's kind of first innovative product.
Yep. And here we go, Vision Pro. Vision, as though the tab on the website is Vision, which, you know, I think we both know that means at some point, much like there's a MacBook Pro and a MacBook, someday there will be a Vision. And the Vision Pro is just where they had to call it the Vision Pro because of the price tag, I'm pretty sure.
100%. I think 100%.
We'll see if that's I mean, my early instinct is that will be the next thing.
I think so. I mean, just like you said, Tesla started off with their higher end product. I think you know, in this case, Apple's saying, hey, we're going to show you the coolest one, and here's what you can get for that price point, and then we'll give you the consumer model that everybody can get. What's interesting about Apple is that, yeah, super innovative, right? You think of them as an innovative company, but they also hold true. Like, I used to love listening to Steve Jobs speak. I still will watch an interview from time to time, but also Tim Cook, and just how they talk about their traditions and values of technology not always being human, And so right now we see this massive push towards AI and all that kind of stuff. And Tim Cook always talks about it in a way like using these technologies to make us have better human experiences, not to metaverse-ize us. Ironically, the Vision Pro kind of does that a little bit, but he always talks about technology disappearing, being there when you need it, and then disappearing when you don't, right? And that's always the philosophy of Apple, and I love that about that, because all of the technology companies are like, buy our products, use this, da da da, and again, Apple knows people are gonna take that approach with their products. They're gonna use it. It's gonna be there, but their angle is we want to create products that are, it's there when you need it and it disappears into the background when you don't.
Yeah.
And I've always appreciated that, especially like as a minimalistic kind of guy. Like I just love all that stuff.
Well, back in the early 2000s, when you would go to the store and look at buying an iPod versus like a Microsoft Zune or the dozens of other, portable music devices, the difference between the iPod packaging and everything else was stark.
Yeah.
Because the iPod was like a white box or black box, depending on the product, but with a picture of the device and the Apple logo. And there's some little writing here, designed in California, designed by Apple in California, all that little stuff.
Yeah.
But it was a clean aesthetic.
Yeah.
Whereas, you'd look at other players and they'd have this chip and these stats and all this stuff just crammed on the logo. And in the same way, like their computer, like a computer versus an Apple computer, you'd see like Intel inside and Pentium and all these like logos and stuff, and then the Apple would just be sitting there, just a picture of the beautiful device.
Yeah, and it's not that they didn't have those things in there. They just don't hang their hats on them.
That's not what they understand, that consumers aren't buying an Apple because of the processing power.
Yeah.
Although today they might.
Well, yeah, but there's other reasons that are attractive equal to that. So
one more example that I thought of while we're talking, unless you have one too.
No.
But one I thought of while we were talking was a company that I follow in Maine called Origin. And they have been becoming more and more popular because they do made in America goods. Okay. And 99% of their materials are sourced from the United States as well. There's a couple things that they just literally can't get in the United States, but they still get them from like North America, I think, or like maybe Central America. I don't know. Excuse me. The reason I love Origin is because they're a newer company in terms of some of the ones we just talked about, or compared to some of the ones we just talked about, but they are doing traditional things in an innovative way. So you can buy blue jeans that are 100% made in America from them. You can buy leather boots that are 100% made in America. And what they have done is they've literally bought old machines that have been out of service, not used in the United States for 20, 30 years, when all the manufacturing moved from the United States overseas. They have restored a lot of these machines. They've invested in some machines as well, some newer machines, the same ones that maybe they're using overseas, but they're using them here instead. A lot of them are like made in Europe, like German engineering, stuff like that. But they are making hunting gear. They're making athletic gear now. They started off making jiu-jitsu gis.
Okay.
Was their like initial claim to fame, and Jocko Willenick invested in them, and so they've got like Cameron Haynes, who's a professional hunter, that's invested in them. So they've got some like celebrity investments, which is why we've kind of like popped up more recently. But it's really cool what they're doing. They have an amazing YouTube channel where you can watch a weekly update on what's going on as they build new factories across the country. Like now they're out, they've got their main factory, and they've got their main factory as in the state of Maine. Yeah. And then they've got facilities in the Carolinas as well. And then they're actually looking at building a brand new, like super sustainable, innovative factory in Maine to do even more stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the cool thing is through their YouTube channel, you see their CEO, you get glimpses into their team meetings, their product development meetings. The most recent video I watched was like literally them like trying on demo products. They're like, well, this isn't fit tested yet, but we were making sure that we could like make the pattern, and you know, crazy. I know. So another company that's doing traditional things in an innovative way, and I feel like that is worth getting on board with.
And they're newer too. It's not like they've been around forever, or
I mean, they're not more than 20 years old. I think, I don't know when they started making jiu-jitsu gis, but I know they initially made them overseas,
right?
And then eventually made the decision that we want to make these here in the States.
Yeah.
How do we do that? Yeah.
I love that. Origin, just Origin, nothing else. Just
okay. ORIGIN, Origin. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover today. If you are listening to this podcast, thank you so much, and we would love to hear from you. Share your own experiences with balancing brand and tradition. And there's a number of ways you can do that. The obvious way is leave a comment on any of the things. Our YouTube is the one that I check the most. And as of right now, we have 97 subscribers.
Let's get 100.
Another cool thing that you could do, and this would be really fascinating and exciting if somebody would do this. If you go to bnpod.com, that'll forward you over to our Spotify page where you can actually leave a voice message. So we could use that in the podcast or in some of our other content.
So at least one is just them ripping us.
First, go for
10 minutes. We just react to it.
Yeah, that'll be our survey. Yeah. Anyways, go for it. You can also email us at hello@bnpod, letter B, letter N, pod.com. And then we're on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Deploy the Nerds. And so share this episode on your channel, and we'll gladly comment and repost on ours. And if you are digging us, it would be awesome if you'd leave a review. You know, that helps us. Or share it with somebody who you think this would be really helpful with. So that's the only way we're going to grow this thing, is if we provide so much value that you want to share it. So please do that. Anyways, that is a wrap for today's episode of the Brand Nerd Podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we'll nerd out with you again next week. See ya. Peace.
If you enjoyed this Brand Nerd Podcast clip, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. In the meantime, here are additional videos you might find illuminating.